Hello and welcome once again to episode 58 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
So before we get into our main topic, it's time for our Indie App Spotlight. Today we are checking out Christmas Guide by Peter Yakub, an iPhone app perfect for the holiday season. So Christmas Guide makes it easy to enjoy over 30 traditional Christmas carols, learn about more than 40 dates and events that occur during the season, and learn about the fun characters like Santa, and even match you up to one of those characters using the magic of machine learning. Christmas Guide is currently free to try via test flight, so please be sure to support Peter by trying it out and submitting your thoughts and feedback. And if you are an indie developer, we want to hear from you. Please reach out to us on Twitter at CodeCompletion via DM so we can spotlight your app in the future as well. So this past week, as we record, I've been taking some time off in a much-deserved break and started playing some games for the first time in what feels like forever. So it got me thinking, what are the differences between game development and app development?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. My experience with game development is fairly little. I know that a lot of times they'll use some sort of, I don't know what you call it, I guess, like a game development IDE, like Unreal. They've got their own app and everything. But I think ultimately it kind of just ends up being some C++, if I'm not, or C or C++ probably. Yeah, I'm honestly not sure. It's definitely, coming from an app development standpoint, definitely different. And even within app development, we've got things like SpriteKit, which I have very, very barely touched. And so it's a whole kind of world that, personally, I know very little about, and kind of, I guess, the process of development, other than people perhaps being overworked and underpaid.
But as you alluded to, it's basically the same. Like, right, we're writing a piece of software. The only difference is instead of fulfilling a need like an app would typically do, you are fulfilling a need of enjoyment by presenting some audiovisual material in a unique and interactive way that makes it into a game. We can get into the whole what is a game question that the
Sure.
most recent Epic case kind of made light of. Like, at every point in the case, I swear, the attorneys were asking, like, what is a game? Like, what's the definition? As if that was like the major important thing to discern whether in-app purchases applied or not. But there's not too many differences, like, from a high level in terms of like what a game is and what an app is from a developer's point of view. Like, ultimately you're writing a program, right? But as you also alluded to, the tools that you use to make games are oftentimes very different than the tools that you use to make apps. Like, as app developers, we are very used to kind of living in Xcode and writing our Objective-C or Swift and using something like UIKit or Swift UI to put together a UI, right? So what are the tools that a game developer might use instead? That, like, we're both unfamiliar, like, spoiler alert, we are not game developers, but we are app developers, so we can allude to it from our point of view or our side of the conversation as much as we can, so that way if anyone in the audience is interested in game development, like, they can know what to kind of learn more about if they wanted to go down that route. So back to my question, what are the tools that you brought up one of them, right?
Yeah, so you've got SpriteKit, which is sort of a 2D engine, or I guess API, I don't know what to call it, library. And then you've got SceneKit as well, which you can use SceneKit definitely for non-game applications, I guess, uses.
Mm-hmm.
And you've also got like ARKit, right? If you wanted to make some AR game, which also, again, you could use for a non-game application, but definitely people have, and I'm sure will continue to make games for kind of all of those, depending on what you want to do. Sorry, I should mention SceneKit is like the 3D kind of, maybe not equivalent, but if you want to use 3D assets, I'm assuming that you would use something like SceneKit. as opposed to Sprite Kit. So kind of depends, I think, on what you want to do. As far as I know, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure I am here. I don't know if people really use Sprite Kit for anything other than game development. I can maybe see a view or two maybe on like a home screen of an app or something with some particle emitter or something, but I don't know. Do you know any other uses for Sprite Kit?
No, I think it was basically made to replace Cocos 2D, which was the kind of mobile friendly game development environment that you as a gamer could go ahead and use to put together a simple tile-based game. Now, what do we mean by tile-based game? If you've ever owned a Game Boy and you or an older like NES or Super Nintendo, anything before 3D graphics really took off, then you would immediately recognize that like everything is very I don't want to say rectangular, but it's very repetitive, and you have like a lot of common elements over and over and over again, and that's essentially what a sprite is. It's one element that you can very cheaply create in the device's memory, and then say, I want to plaster this all over the place. So you can have a wall, a background, and then you'll have different sprites for different things. Maybe like a tree sprite, or maybe a platform sprite. You'll have one for the character, one for the enemies, and so on and so forth. So Sprite Kit is, as its name alludes to, makes it very easy to kind of build this sort of game, because it gives you all the tools necessary or that you need to kind of put together a game of this nature, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think Sprite Kit would be super cool. Again, I've looked into it, but I've used it very little other than a couple maybe tutorial projects on like Ray Wenderlich or something. But I've always wanted to make a game on iOS, and kind of specifically with Sprite Kit. Like one of my favorite game franchises is Fire Emblem, and it's very tile based. I literally like you move around in a grid, and so I feel like it sort of lends itself really well to Sprite Kit. And there is a Fire Emblem, like a Nintendo Fire Emblem game on the App Store. But I think it would still be really fun to get into and just kind of learn about. I think one thing with making a game is the whole you have to come up with assets, or you have to find assets, and that's like its own whole thing, where I've thought about doing that game and everything and just having like letters or something for the tiles, because I don't know where to get assets. I don't, necessarily want to hire someone to make the assets for me. So I guess that has always been like a little bit of a blocker to actually kind of going through with it. I think that there are maybe some like preloaded assets. I could be wrong, but anyway, I think it would be super fun to learn about Sprite Kit in general.
Yeah, I don't think there are any preloaded assets, but there are open source assets that you can kind of use for this purpose. But if you've ever wondered why a lot of the indie games on the App Store all still use the same style from like the 80s, for lack of like a better time frame, it's because as a single person, your ability to do everything that is necessary for a game to be developed is very limiting, right? You are a single person to do the code, which means all of the behavior in the game, the storyline, the writing, the design work, the music. Like, you need to do a lot of stuff. So limiting yourself to what you might think of as an archaic art style of pixels, for instance, or something that has a smaller color palette, is actually what makes it possible for a single person to pull it off at the same time. Because at that time, like when Nintendo was making The Legend of Zelda, for instance, the very first one was something doable by a small team. It wasn't all hands on deck to make that game at the beginning, at least. Maybe towards the finish line and get more and more resources to kind of finish it. But at the beginning, it's just, hey, like, how far can we take this idea? And you have 50% of the game at that point. And then the other 50% is just the polish and making it as good a game as you can possibly make it. And if you look at a lot of those early games, like The Legend of Zelda, there isn't necessarily all that much polish in the very first one. It was
Right.
the later ones that gained more and more polish over time. So it's certainly possible for one person to kind of make something of that level. And ultimately, it comes down to what you are, as a developer, comfortable with. Like, you need to make some assets, so you make some really low resolution assets so no one can tell you that they're badly designed. Like, it's a
Yeah.
given at that point, right?
Yes.
As long as you get the idea across, then maybe people can get immersed enough to turn a blind eye to the fact that your blocks are not more detailed than an 8x8 like set of squares, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly. I think, sorry to cut you off. I was
no,
just
go
going to
for it.
say, I think that style is super cool. And I always love like the pixel art style in general. So for me, that would probably be what I'd want to do anyway. I wouldn't want anything high fidelity per se. So yeah, I think it would be cool. It just seems like you were saying, you've got music, you've got assets, you've got the code, which is fine, and all of these things where it seems like there is a lot more. It's a lot more broad, the amount of
Hmm.
things that you need to do than as an app developer. You are writing the code and maybe coming up with some UI design, and that's basically it. You don't have to worry about music generally, I suppose, or anything like that in sort of a basic app. So there's a lot there, but at the
Hmm.
same time, I think it would be fun. And yeah, maybe that is a good solution where you just find some royalty-free music, you find some open source assets, and just kind of get started like that. I don't know.
Hmm.
Maybe just as a learning experience more than anything than actually trying to release it. I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm definitely
And
no designer. That's the problem.
yeah, and you don't even need to be a developer to make games. Like, there are
Hmm.
tools like Game Maker's. No game. Now I'm drawing a blank. Um,
I think it is Game Maker.
Game Maker.
Yeah, I think so.
Um, So there's a tool called GameMaker, and it essentially allows you to put together a game of a very constrained like vision. Like, it has to fit within what the tool can like make for you, but it allows you to be creative and design multiple screens. You have a character that moves with controller inputs, and you piece together a game little by little. And a very famous game that was made this way is Undertale, for instance,
Right.
where the developer of the game wasn't necessarily hunkering down with C++ code to make that work. They just got right to making the game that they wanted to make. And they were able to pull in existing experience making music, which is why the music is amazing. It's not like
Yes.
that wasn't their first rodeo with that, but they were able to pull in like existing skills that they had to make a game that worked really well. And ultimately, it's a black and white game. Like, there's no color, there's very little definition in terms of shape, but you immediately think past that as you start playing and get immersed in the story. So there are other facets of game development that are super important that can help mask the deficiencies that you might have as a developer, and might not be able to bring everything, all those things together necessarily, right?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And I just looked it up. It is Game Maker, and that game that that I mentioned, like it was probably a dozen or so episodes ago, Loop Hero, that I started really playing, is also made in Game Maker. So you can make some really cool games. And I mean, Undertale is critically acclaimed, and they have their characters in Smash Bros. And everything, which to me is the
That's when
apex
you know when you
of
make it, when you made
accomplishment.
it.
Yeah. But just me being a fanboy there. But yeah, I mean, super cool that you've got all of these avenues to make a game. And another cool thing is, depending on how you make the app, definitely not in SpriteKit, but you've got I don't actually know if they still do it on iOS, but like Unity was or is cross-platform, so you can
Hmm.
get your game out to more people. I don't know if people still actually you can do that in iOS still. It's been a hot minute since I've seen a game in Unity, but I also don't really get games anymore on my phone.
Well, one of
So,
them is Forensic. So if you've owned an iPhone in the early days, one popular game was Forensic, where you kind of match up these little pizza pies or cores, as they call them, to kind of get like colored circles completed. That was recently re-released on Apple Arcade, and the developers, who you can follow on Twitter, Icon Factory, they have been pretty liberal in sharing that they are using Unity to kind of put this together, and voicing their grievances that Unity isn't super reliable in M1 Max yet. So they've been honest about that. But they do use Unity to put that game together, and it is a very different feeling game than the original was. There's like support characters. There's the whole thing feels more complete, really.
yeah, and Apple Arcade's super cool. I mean, kind of feels like a tangent. I mean, we're not talking about game development specifically, but Apple Arcade has been interesting to see the games that are on there. At first, I wasn't particularly interested in any games, but lately I've noticed that, yeah, they've been coming out with, like, I guess what you could call classic iOS games that have been around for basically the length of the App Store. You've got like Really Bad Chess and Tiny Wings. I don't know. Yeah, a bunch of games
Just add
that,
a
like,
plus to it, and then that's how you
yes,
know it's
exactly, right? And it's
the
like,
Apple Arcade version.
oh shoot, I played these
Threes.
on, yeah, I played these on like my iPhone 4. Like, these have been around forever. Forgot about them and kind of rediscover them on Apple Arcade. So it's cool that they're doing that. And I don't know, the games are simple, right? Like, it's an Apple Arcade game, but like they'll add things to them, or even if they don't, just making it so that it runs on a larger screen phone than, you know, our 4x3 displays used to be. Super cool that people are, I don't know. It's interesting. Apple Arcade is like this weird thing where I think Apple is like half putting in their feet into gaming, but they're not like super committed, where now we have Macs that are like, could probably push, you know, some games to their limits. And I'm interested to see in like the next couple of years if they get more less like arcadey titles and more like triple A-ish titles in Apple Arcade, or at least incentivize developers to come onto macOS and iOS. I don't know.
Yeah, they
It'll be
definitely.
interesting to see.
There's a few games like that. Like Oceanhorn is kind of the more Zelda clone, 3D Zelda clone type game, and that one seems like it's up there in terms of pushing graphical performance, but not nearly as much as what a PC gamer, quote unquote, would claim. Like, this is the AAA game, yada yada. It very much mirrors Nintendo's ability to kind of push graphical performance rather than a PlayStation 5 or what a PC build could potentially get you. So it's hard to draw kind of strings there of
Yeah.
Something
that Nintendo does really well is, like, especially with the Nintendo Switch, is they have like, if you ever go on their eShop, they have so many indie titles. It's ridiculous. And again, like, that, it lends itself to probably being cross-platform and everything. But they've just got, I mean, thousands of games I've just never even heard of that are just small indie titles that are, you know, going for $5-10 or whatever. And it would just be super cool to see that on Mac. And not that I need my Mac to be a gaming computer or anything. Like, I love my Switch. I also have a PC for when I want to game on that. But I feel like for as much as they're defending the App Store, it would be cool to have more in there than apps and Apple Arcade and gotcha apps, because that seems like that's about all there is.
Yeah. And there is also a lot of kind of pushback from indie developers for like publishing on a Mac. They say, oh, there's too many steps involved and this and that. And it's easy for us to be blind to that because we use Xcode, and Xcode takes care of it all. But if you don't use Xcode, then you need to figure out signing, you need to figure out notarization, you need to figure out this and that. You have to have a paid developer's account and all of that. So if there are any indie game developers listening, if you can somehow coerce your build system or whatever cross-platform thing you were using to be able to finally build using Xcode, all you really need is a $99 a year like developer account, and you can publish on Apple platforms, whether that's on the App Store or yourself. Like you would be able to self-sign things, and people wouldn't be greeted with scary dialogues the first time they try to launch it and it just fails. So that's like the bare minimum that you need as a third-party developer, and it's thankfully not that much. Like with Nintendo and Sony, it's a big private NDA and multi-$1,000 development kit to kind of be able to test on the platform and all that. So thankfully on the Mac, yeah, you need a Mac. So I guess that's the multi-$1,000 development kit, but a MacBook Air is like more than good enough for many uses, and especially games. Like it has the same chops in it that Apple's mobile devices have, which is about right up there with a Nintendo Switch. So it's not underperforming.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. I'm honestly blown away. Like, again, it's tangent here, but I love my Nintendo Switch. I think it's like, quote unquote, the perfect console in the sense that, sometimes I'll be like, I want to play a game on the couch, and it's like, oh, I can do that. Oh, I want to put it on my TV. I can also do that. So nice. So yeah, it's good. It's so interesting, Nintendo's kind of methods of gaining market share, where they're not competing for like highest frame rate, highest resolution, and yet because they have so many exclusive titles and they kind of cater to that, they do really well. Not to say that everything Nintendo does is great, but I'm hopeful to see what the next Nintendo Switch is.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it is. No, go for it. Sorry.
They definitely learned from their mistakes, right? They tried something very similar with the Wii U, where you're like connected to TV, but then like as soon as your parents want to use the TV, you can pull that thing away and start playing in a nearby room, and it would still work. But the technology wasn't there yet to be able to have everything be in the handheld portion. So it's easy to think that they failed at that and therefore they scrambled to get something up next. They didn't really need to scramble or rush because they did plan to have plenty of profit margins to be able to have the company survive through hardships like that and try different things. Like Nintendo's known for trying wacky things every now and then, and some things succeed and some things don't. But they learn from each of those, and that's why they have a success like the Switch at the end of the day. They realized there were great things about the Wii U, and there were some not so great things about it as well. And they could package that in a way that makes everyone happy. And I think the Switch is the culmination of that, right? And it's a testament that they didn't have to change anything for how many years now? Almost 4 years. And
it's crazy.
It's the same thing. Like the new one came out, it doesn't make it more powerful, it just makes it more battery efficient.
That their SoC is something like 7 or 8 years old. Like it well predates the Switch, even what they have in there, whatever the NVIDIA SoC is. And yeah, that's great. I mean, it would be cool to have it running at 1440p or something, but at the same time, it looks fine on a TV, and it looks great on when you're playing in handheld. So super happy with it. It's cool.
Yeah, and recently I've also been watching some streams of the beta Ocarina of Time, like dig ups that have happened over time, and some developers essentially reverse engineered how the betas would have looked and all that, so that way people can play them and stream them and stuff like that. And it really goes to show you how much more amazing The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time looks than Super Mario 64 on the same console. Like, this is something that Nintendo had a few extra years to really learn about, like, how they can squeeze every ounce of performance out of that thing to make something much more polished and much more of an experience than was possible And you can only really do that when you stay on a platform and when you really try to improve things as much as you can with the limitations that you have, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of, I'm sure we've kind of talked about this before, but the whole concept of limitations is super interesting from really kind of any perspective, whether it's development and in iOS or for a game, right? You've got some limitation, whether it's memory or the graphical power that you have, and you kind of make the most of it. And yeah, I mean, Ocarina of Time is great at that, but you've also got um, games coming out today, like for the PC, that are like very, like Undertale is a perfect example. It's not graphically intensive. You could run it on, probably a 15, 20-year-old PC at this point, it would run fine. That's kind of a cool thing, I think, that not everyone is striving for, probably because they don't have the assets or, team required to build something super big, but also some people just like that style and they kind of just go for whatever. I don't know, like they kind of almost place artificial limitations on themselves, where like Ocarina of Time, they were pushing the envelope, but now people
They were
like
trying to
bring
make
it
it look
back.
realistic.
Yes. And I don't know if you ever saw this, you probably did, but like the I don't even know if it was like an actual demo, but they were like screenshots of like the next Zelda game back in the day when it was like pre Ocarina of Time. It was just conceptual. Forget what it was called, but it looked amazing even in screenshots, and it didn't quite live up to that, but I'm sure they tried their heart out to get as good as it can be. And I mean, I think that's half the reason that it's such a classic game. I mean, I don't know if it's still number one, but it was, number one best game of all time for like easily a decade or two. So, uh, and that's awesome. And now people are kind of doing the opposite, where they're pulling the envelope back and they're saying, okay, I'm just gonna like stay within this, and like that's the point. Maybe whether it's to get more people able to play the game because they don't need the requirements, to be super high or whatever it is. But it's cool to see people still making games that are, whether, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going. I guess it's cool to see that people aren't always just going for like the best graphical fidelity, but they're just kind of being artistic with this now that maybe we have the headroom to do so, and it's not maybe as hard as it would have been to make something. Like, I'm sure that you could probably make assets that look sort of on the same level of a Nintendo 64 game relatively easier than you could have back in the day, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's almost as if striving for reality like sets you up for like that much
Yeah.
more of a headache. Where when you do take a more stylistic approach, you have a lot more leeway to not be perfect, in a way. Like
Yeah.
if you want to make a realistic looking human, you have to make 100% realistic looking human. If you mess up a tiny bit, you failed.
It's
Whereas
that
if you
uncanny
make
valley.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas if you make something that reminds you of a human but is not striving to replace it, aka Link
Yes.
from Ocarina of Time, you are totally fine. Like, as long as that's not in high resolution, you're not like perturbed by it at all, because it's not replacing reality in any way, and your brain is not like firing off the alarms that that's a alien invader trying to get into your click somehow. And not that we need those alarms, but that's something that we all have built in, and unfortunately, that makes it hard for people to make stuff that looks realistic. In fact, one of my favorite games from a while ago was a game called Geometry Wars, which is basically an asteroids kind of knockoff with like more power ups and stuff like that. But it does not evolve on asteroids and making like a realistic ship and realistic asteroids in any way. It's the ship is still a triangle. The asteroids are quite literally squares or triangles or circles. That's it. But where they excelled was taking the graphical abilities of modern hardware, namely the Xbox when this like first came out, and they added a third dimension to the game without adding a third playable dimension, meaning when you blasted an enemy and they blew up, suddenly the Z direction of the fabric of the background started bouncing up and down, and there's flares and particle effects going crazy, and the whole screen is lighting up, and it's like visually very mesmerizing when at the end of the day the game's still asteroids. So you can use the graphical abilities that we now have that you didn't back then, but still make something as simplistic as games from back then and still have a successful game out of it. And I think that if you want to get into game development, instead of striving to get that super realistic thing right off the bat, go for something more stylistic and play with the leeway that you have. Like, say you make something super simple and you still have another 10 milliseconds on your frame budget. You can not use it and it'll be great for battery, or you can use it to add stupid flair that just makes people smile. And that might be enough that can set your game apart from like the rest, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think the example that came to me was Undertale, and I'm not gonna like spoil anything, but it's very 2D pixel art the entire game, and then when you get to like the very, 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 very end of the game, it is insane, and you're like, it's so jarring in a good way because it's unlike anything that is the rest of the game, and it is so insane, and you're like, okay, this is it. In a stylistic sense, it just I don't know. It's very cool stylistically because of things like that. The hardware can push that where I'm sure that couldn't have run on an SNES or something.
Yeah, the game up until that point would have been fine, but then from that point forward, it's like we don't have that many colors.
Yeah. So super cool to see something like that. Real quick, I wanted to go back to Ocarina of Time because I think both Dimitri and I really, really like that game. If you don't follow kind of Ocarina of Time, or you haven't like played it since the 90s or whatever, there are some super dedicated people to on kind of in the, I guess, community of Ocarina of Time still today, not the least of which are like streamers that are, you know, speed running the game and stuff. But even more than that, kind of more on the topic of game development is kind of what Dimitri said with, there was this it's this crazy story. It's like someone found a Nintendo 64 cartridge of like a beta version of F-Zero, but only half of the cartridge had the beta on it, and the rest of the cartridge had parts and like assets of the like a very early version of Ocarina of Time. And so it
was a 1 year out from release. The Space World 97 thing.
That's a huge gap of time in development. That things changed, and what these people did is, well, one, they're doing a I think they're calling it the Ocarina of Time decompilation project. So they're literally decompiling the game and making, like, basically trying to figure out how it was written so that they can reverse engineer, which is amazing. But like Dimitri said, someone put together this beta showcase and made it playable, a playable ROM that you could throw on an emulator or even on a Nintendo 64 if you had the right tool. I think it's like an EverDrive or something. That's amazing. Like, so, I don't know. I've talked to Dimitri and the other code completionists about this before, but I think people's dedication to not even old games, but just like consumers' dedication to games and like preserving them, especially like Ocarina of Time. And you've got this whole thing with, I don't know if you've been kind of looking at it, but this whole thing with Rockstar Games and taking down fan-made mods of like the GTA games that make them look super nice visually, way past what they were capable of before. There's a lot of dedication that people have, and it's super cool to see programmers getting into this, not just saying like, oh yeah, we'll let speedrunners speedrun the game for 20 plus years, but they're actively developing tools to make it so that they can run through the game quickly and add debug menus and add macros so that they can, or I don't know if you call it a macro, but like record gameplay so that you can play it back later as like a showcase. And just there's so much stuff going on that it's super cool to see all of this dedication, but it's also like very disheartening to see like the soul sucking corporate side of game development studios. And there's been a ton of stuff lately with like Blizzard and EA and stuff, and it's just like going back to what I said at the start. Generally it sounds like, and I'm no game developer so I don't know, but I think very large companies like that tend to very much overwork their employees and underpay them, and it's a bummer. It's like there's so much love. I mean, I'm sure that so many people coming from, you know, our age and before grew up with just these very basic video games. They want to work on games their whole life. I remember when I was growing up, I wanted to at least be a game tester, if not like, you know, build my own games. That sounded amazing. And then you've just got these people that are kind of taking advantage and not really keeping like the heart or the soul, I guess, of this love in game development specifically, if that makes sense.
Well, it's the Disney thing all over again, right? Disney is famous for pushing copyright law to no longer encompass like what a reasonable amount of time would be, and it's now like infinite in terms of like Disney's ownership of its intellectual property, and preventing that from entering the public domain over time. Like, it's because of Disney that things no longer enter the public domain, when the only things left in the public domain are really old at this point, and no one's really interested in it anymore. So it could have been, we could have lived in a different future where the games we grew up with would have entered public domain by now, and we could go ahead and do what we want with them at that point. Like, yes, Nintendo is still technically making money off of Ocarina of Time, but unfortunately, the most recent incarnation of it on the Switch is kind of not the greatest representation of it. The graphical fidelity is off. The input lag is apparently really off, and it's unfortunate for people who really like these older games that they can't legally like use them in ways that Nintendo wouldn't be happy with, or for all these other games where people are kind of having fun improving them in ways that the original developer never would. They are just more interested in maintaining their copyright and trademarks on them and preventing people from like enjoying them. Like, there's an excellent remake of the original Legend of Zelda with 3D like voxels, and someone just like put that on GitHub one day. It was like, hey, I made this, but then Nintendo very quickly brought it down because they're like, no, we still own that. And 30 years later they're still releasing stuff with the original Legend of Zelda. So like, they are still interested in making money off of it, and therefore we can't have it. That's all there is to it.
The Nintendo ninjas, they get everyone. I don't know anything about game development. It's hard. I mean, I like games, but my experience with the development of them is zero.
Well, I actually do have experience making a single game, and that was a game called Sluzzles, and that was for the iPhone. And it was written like an app because that's all I knew. So it used core animation to move stuff around, as one does when no one knows nothing about game development. All the sound effects were me in front of a microphone going and stuff like that. And it worked. Like, when you isolate that and you don't have a face doing popping sounds, it sounds like you're tapping and something's popping. And I was able to make a very simple puzzle game that was kind of like a Rubik's Cube, kind of like a sliding puzzle. And it was something that was possible for a single person to kind of make in 2 weeks, which is what it took to make the original version. So that is to say, anyone who wants to kind of like make a game, if you have an idea, if you have a story you want to tell, I would say just go for it. Set limitations on yourself, so that way you can kind of bring it to completion, and you can learn from that whole experience, right? I would have never thought to use like my own mouth in front of a microphone to make sound effects or stuff unless I was like, well, it's boring without sound effects, so how can I like spruce it up? And I was just messing around one day. I was like, perfect. There's this thing called a Ludum Dare. I think that's what it's called, right? Where every now and then it's a game jam where you have basically 24 hours to kind of make the most simplistic game based off of a really simple prompt. And then you'll be able to like browse everyone else's creations at the end of it. And it's a great way to kind of get your feet wet and try it out without feeling like you need to complete and polish every aspect of it. And if there's something that you end up liking from that process, then you can go ahead and like take it further. That's my own advice for anyone that wants to kind of get into this. Like, start small and work your way up, because as we said, it's a lot for one single person to do. And as you iterate, just like I keep using this, but it's a great example in my head. If you iterate on something like The Legend of Zelda, then you end up with Ocarina of Time, and then you end up with Breath of the Wild 30 years later. It didn't happen overnight, but it is something that can happen if you build upon your own abilities little by little. Like, you're not going to be the one person making all of Breath of the Wild, but you'll have all the experience necessary to kind of lead a team to go ahead and make something like that actually happen over 5 years of development. So you got to build up little by little, because if you take 5 years at a time, you're never going to get a game out, really. And no one who's spent 5 years making a game, that's never their first game. Like, they've always made smaller ones and they played around with the idea several times before that. So that's my advice to anyone who wants to get into making games. If all you know is development, or if you don't even know development but you have other skill sets, like, you don't need the development part. You can still make a game. The Playdate, for instance, is a very constrained piece of hardware that's coming out, and they have an entire web-based authoring studio where you can make a Playdate game that's based off of sprites and stuff like that. Like, it's limited in that way, but you don't need to be a programmer, which is like 100% possible for everyone to kind of get into, no matter your experience level.
Yeah, that reminded me. Again, both Dimitri and I both watched the the Digital Corridor crew, and a couple of the people on that team, like within the last year or so, got into Unreal Engine and stuff, and they'll do these, challenges where they have to follow along with a Bob Ross tutorial, and they can kind of follow along with whatever they want. So, like, one person was using the iPad app Procreate, one person was using Blender, and one of the guys used Unreal Engine to build this entire island scene and everything in Unreal Engine.
Here's a scenery, and here's a controller.
That's so funny. Really, yeah, it's so cool. And he was just dropping things in. I don't think he wrote any code, but there's a couple of videos of them using Unreal Engine. It's like, drop in assets, you can add logic and everything, conditional logic, to make the game work and do things based on whatever conditions. So definitely possible without coding experience if you want to get into it as well. Or you could try something like SpriteKit, or I don't really know how it works if you can drop into the C. I'm sure you could, and like the C and C++, even in Unreal Engine, if you wanted to tweak things. But that's where my knowledge ends.
This week's episode of Code Completion is once again brought to you by SuperEasyTimer. SuperEasyTimer is a quick and easy-to-use timer app for your Mac. It's completely text-based, so you can type in English what you want, 20 minutes or 5 p.m., hit enter, and instantly start a timer. The timer understands English text to create, update, and start a new timer. You can quickly change an active countdown, even while it's still counting down. There are simple keyboard shortcuts to reset or pause, no menus, no sliders, just use English to control your timer. We want to thank SuperEasyTimer for sponsoring our show. Search for SuperEasyTimer on the Mac App Store today to give it a try. So now that we've gone through our topics, it's time for Complete the Code, where we quiz our listeners on your knowledge of Swift, Apple, and all things development. Spencer?
Yes, so we have a winner for last week's async await prompt, and I think this is a repeat winner. And again, I am probably going to mess up your name, so I'm sorry. Mio or Miho, Grassanin, who writes that we can replace let with async let to have the tasks return futures instead, and add an await before present item, so it's only called once the promises fulfilling those futures are resolved. And that's absolutely correct. So this week we have another async await question for you all. So as always, you can, if you're listening to the podcast, you can check the podcast art or the show notes to follow along. Here we have an async method that loads a list of images one at a time from a list of IDs. How can you make all calls to load image run concurrently and then return images in the same order?
So thank you, Spencer. So if you think you can complete the code, tweet your answers to us with hashtag CompleteTheCode, all one word. The first to get it right will get a shout out on the following week's show. Now, this week, we don't have a new piece of tech per se for our mini review corner, but Spencer was lucky enough to get his COVID-19 booster vaccine. So what's your mini review on that?
Yes, well, I have 6G now in my arm. Now that I have 3, it's 2Gs per shot, I think, is how it works. So got 6G, that's cool. No, in all seriousness, I'm stoked to get it. It's been almost exactly 6 months since I got my original, or finished getting my original vaccination, so in May. And yeah, I'm stoked to get it. I think it's definitely something that people should do, and I have very recently kind of had a personal experience with its importance, because everyone in my immediate family, my parents and my brother, all just got COVID this week. So, and they're mostly not vaccinated. I think my mom is, but definitely get it because it helps and saves lives. And I'm, little worried about my family. It sounds like they're not doing too bad, like symptom wise, but it's always scary, and it kind of sucks that I think it could have been easily prevented. So.
Yeah, and a lot of people like to point out that, like, hey, why get vaccinated for something that just has like a 1% mortality rate? Well, for like every 1% that dies from this, like there's 20 times the amount of individuals that just have permanent heart problems for the rest of their life. And
Yeah.
that's no fun. Like, get vaccinated. That's a good, easy way to protect yourself for one or like a few measly days of being uncomfortable, maybe, like depending on if it influences you. Like Lynn, my wife, her arm hurt, that was it. I got a fever for night, that was it for my like second shot. And we're both looking forward to get our boosters in like a day, so we're really looking forward to that. And if you have the ability to get vaccinated, or have the ability to tell someone that's close to you to get vaccinated, please do. It's super, super important.
Yep. And 1% of 8 billion people is a lot of people that are dying.
It is indeed.
So it's taking it into context, it's a lot of people.
Yeah, and 20 times that is even more people that you don't want to
get some heart and lung damage. Yeah,
that's a bummer. Fun, the best kind of damage.
I've been thinking about this a lot because of my family getting COVID. It's not the same, but I think it's pretty close to wearing a seatbelt, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could drive all day, every day, and never get in a car crash, but at the same time, there are things you can't control, and you definitely could. So,
yeah, they call them accidents for a reason. It's not because people are like gunning out for you; it just happens. And seatbelt is the easiest way to not die in a car accident, or to prevent fatal injury, or even a little bit of injury. Like it can really help. So just a great analogy back to like a vaccine. Like, yes, it does seem like it's been rushed, even though it wasn't. Like there's a lot of research that went into this for decades, and it just happened to align well with like COVID coming out, that we were lucky enough to be able to use a new type of vaccine that is really doing a lot of excellent work at preventing a lot of people from dying. So if you can, it really like that booster really boosts your own ability to protect yourself, like way past what the 2 shots did. So if you can get it, definitely get it. I think that is our ticket to normality going forward. So on that wonderful note, I want to thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes get released. And feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who's at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name, once again, is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Bunil. That's DimitриBounil. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
So I actually do have a piece of tech that we can kind of mini review for Commented Out. Okay. And that is this wonderful gizmo, which is the Game & Watch Legend of Zelda thing. And look how cool this is. As you pull it, it's like a different game underneath.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Yeah, when you mentioned that they're still making things, I was like, oh, I know exactly what he's talking about. That's cool.
Yeah, so that's this little gizmo.
Have you played with it?
Here, you can see Spencer in the reflection. I totally have played with it. It charges via USB-C, which I think is awesome. No more mini USB, micro USB, or whatever it's called. Oh my gosh, worst. And it is through this iteration of the original Legend of Zelda that I have gone the farthest on the original Legend of Zelda, because that game is hard.
Yes,
that is
and does not hold your hand.
It does not hold your hand at all. I consistently die within like 10 screens, but I guess just having it in my hand makes it fun to just like try again and keep going. So I've stumbled upon a level 3 and made it halfway through that. I don't know where levels 1 and 2 are, so still trying to search for those.
It's okay.
I have almost enough rupees to buy arrows. I don't know if that's going to be useful. There's no hand holding, as Spencer said. It's just like, go adventure, have fun. So that's what I've been doing this past week.
Nice. So it's got 1 and 2. Does it have? I thought it had 3 things, right?
Yeah. So it has 1 and 2. It actually has 1 and 2 and Link's Awakening as well. Which was the Game Boy game.
Sweet. Mm-hmm. Link's Awakening is great. Yeah.
And then it has a Game & Watch game called Vermin, which is themed after Link, so it's Octoroks that are kind of coming up, and you have to smash them with the hammer. And then it has Clock and Timer, which are completely interactive, so it will show the clock as a level, so the water would be the numbers of the clock, and you, as Link, gotta navigate around them and try to survive as long as possible.
That's super cool. For the viewers at home, and mostly me, how much is that, and are they still available?
I have no idea. It just came out. I think it was under $100. Seems like you're searching, so we'll find out soon.
I am. Yeah, I wasn't super interested in the Mario one, but the Zelda one sounds super, super cool. $50. Not bad.
Yeah, so if you can get it before the scalpers do, highly recommend it.
Yes.
It's a fun little gizmo.
Oh, and Best Buy. Hey, they're in stock. Hey, cool. That's fun.
Yeah, I don't know what is up with like Nintendo and scalpers. I wish Nintendo just did what Apple did and just continues taking back orders, you know? Like, yes, it will ship in 5 months. Who cares? My order's in. I am happy. It will eventually get here.
Your place in line is there.
Yes, exactly. I think that every company should do this. I don't know why no company does. Maybe they have like deals with like retail, I guess. I don't know. Just continue giving the retail what they need, but like allow people to just put in an order with confidence that they have a spot in line and a reasonable estimated date. And if they're not happy with that date, they can go retail hunting. Like I did for Wii back when the Wii came out, because that was like impossible to get. Yes. So yeah. Nintendo and every other company out there, just take back orders on your own shop. Like, it's amazing that Nintendo didn't even have a shop like until recently. Can you even buy like a Switch through it, or is it just like the accessories?
I don't know, but yeah, I mean, you're right. It was you bought the you got in like the first round of the wireless Nintendo 64 controller.
Yeah.
They were out of stock for a couple weeks. I got one in that next iteration, and then now it says like they won't be available till like spring of 2022 or something. It's like just yeah, I agree. Just let me just let me order it, like give you my money and know that it'll come sometime, and then there's like not the onus of going
Anxious.
back in
Anxiety.
and yeah, going back 3 months later when I forgot about it and then missing it again. Bummer. But cool. I'm very tempted to go get one. Sounds like it's selling out. There's one 21 miles away from me that I might just go and get.
Do it.
I should.
Before
It's
Black
super
Friday.
cool.
Once the
yeah.
swarm enters any store, it's just going to be nothing left.
Yeah.
Whether it was discounted or not. Which sucks for everyone listening to this. Sorry. You're not going to be able to benefit.
So, hope that you had good luck. I'm not planning on buying anything, but you know, for all those that are getting their yearly TV or whatever, yes, please stay safe. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I'm sure that it'll be a lot more intense than it was last year. Nothing really went on last year anyway.
I don't know. There's always the chance that everyone got jaded because they stopped having anything for like Black Friday anyways, like anything reasonable. And it has extended for like 2 months. Oh, our Black Friday sale in May.
Yes.
So like, I don't know. Have we reached the full year of Black Friday?
Yeah. I don't know, but it's seriously been like I've been seeing like pre-Black Friday deals on Amazon and Newegg for at least since the start of the month. It's like, why? Can we just either call them normal deals or I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if like Black Friday continues to be a thing. I don't know. In the next
Apple calls it a holiday shopping event now. Yes. They're not even acknowledging that's called Black Friday anymore.
Probably a good strategy, honestly.
Anyways. Bye, everyone.
Bye.